Hello, my name is Chen. Let's begin.
Let me tell you something about humans. No. Actually, let me start over. Let me tell you something about the day I almost died watching someone else almost die, and somehow, by the grace of every ancestor I have ever had, nobody actually died. Although I will admit, there were several moments where I genuinely believed the universe had simply decided to end, quietly, without warning, just to save us all the embarrassment. It started, as most catastrophes do, with an idea that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. The Valari Accord had been brokering peace negotiations between the Durathi hegemony and the Solvani collective for approximately 11 months. 11 months of sitting in rooms that smelled like burned minerals, listening to two species argue about territorial boundaries that had not mattered to anyone in 3 centuries. 11 months of translating insults into diplomatic language. 11 months of pretending that phrases like "your ancestors composed music with their digestive tracts" were simply cultural expressions requiring context. I was, to put it plainly, exhausted. Ambassador Dura, representing the hegemony, was a 7-foot slab of pale granite who communicated primarily through the vibration of her chest plates. Ambassador Solvek, representing the collective, was a floating cluster of bioluminescent tissue that expressed disagreement by turning violently purple and emitting high-pitched frequency pulses that, loosely translated, meant something between "you are wrong" and "I hope your homeworld develops seasonal flooding." And then there was Commander Mira Vasek, human, female, approximately 1.7 meters tall, assigned as the neutral military observer by the Terran Cooperative, which had generously agreed to lend its personnel to the Accord's peacekeeping efforts because, and I quote, the official documentation here, humanity is invested in stable galactic relations and the avoidance of regional conflict.
What the documentation did not say, and what I had not been warned about, was that Commander Vasek had the energy of someone who had consumed stimulants, won a competitive sporting event, and was still looking for more things to win.
She arrived at the negotiation station on the day of the 43rd session, wearing her standard Terran Cooperative uniform, carrying a bag that appeared to contain food, because humans apparently cannot sit through a 4-hour diplomatic session without eating, and smiling the specific smile that I would later come to recognize as the smile that precedes events I would need to document very carefully for the official incident report. The 43rd session collapsed, as the 42nd had, and the 41st before it, because Ambassador Dora refused to acknowledge that the mineral extraction rights along the Gorvan Belt had any bearing on the trade route dispute, and Ambassador Solvek turned purple 11 times in 20 minutes, which is medically inadvisable for a Solvani of his age. I called the session to a halt, and then Dora said something that in retrospect I should have seen as the beginning of the end. She said, "The Solvani have no honor. Any species that hides behind floating tissue and legal documents has never understood what it means to hold ground." Solvek pulsed white, which for a Solvani is the equivalent of going very, very quiet. And Commander Vasek, who had been sitting in the corner eating something that smelled aggressively of salt and artificial flavoring, looked up from her food and said, "You know what, I've been to 11 of these sessions. Can I ask a question?" Nobody said yes. She asked anyway, "Why don't you just settle one of the contested points with a duel?" The room became the kind of silent that has texture. I turned to look at her. "Commander Vilaf, this is a diplomatic forum." "Right," she said, nodding as if I had confirmed something useful. "And it's been going nowhere for 11 months. I'm just saying. Back on Earth, sometimes when 2 sides can't agree, you pick one symbolic contest and whoever wins gets the point. Literally just 1 point, not the whole negotiation. Just one. It builds trust. It shows good faith. It moves things forward." Durathi's chest plates vibrated slowly. "The Durathi have never refused a challenge of honor." Solvek pulsed once, a color I can only describe as reluctant gold. "The collective does not oppose symbolic contests, provided the parameters are defined with legal precision." I stared at both of them. Then I stared at Commander Vilesic. She gave me the smile. The smile. I filed 3 internal objections. I referenced precedent from the Accord's founding charter. I pointed out that introducing competitive physical elements into diplomatic proceedings was categorically outside the agreed framework of the current negotiation. Dura said, "If the Accord representative is afraid, we can note that in the session record." I was not afraid. I was professionally and categorically opposed. We scheduled the duel for the following morning. Now, here is where I need to explain something about the Valari Accord's peacekeeping protocols regarding neutral military observers. The neutral observer is precisely that. Neutral. They observe. They document. They do not participate, advocate or influence proceedings except in cases of immediate physical danger to a diplomatic party. What the protocols do not specifically address, because nobody in the history of the Accord had apparently thought it necessary to address, is what happens when the neutral military observer is the one who suggested the duel, and both parties then agree that the neutral observer should be the one to demonstrate it first, as a show of good faith from the mediating body. Solvek proposed this with the specific legal precision he applied to everything. A preliminary demonstration by the Accord's representative would confirm that the format is impartial and physically achievable by non-partisan participants. Dura's chest plates hummed in agreement. The human is small and clearly not a warrior. If even she can perform the contest, it demonstrates that the bar is accessible. Commander Vosek, sitting across from me, turned her head very slightly and looked at me. I looked back at her. I attempted to communicate, using only my eyes and the controlled rigidity of my secondary jaw, that under no circumstances was she to agree to this. She said, "Sure, I'll go first. What's the contest?" I closed all four of my eyes. The contest, as defined by the Durathi tradition of formal honor duels, was a speed test, not combat. The Accord would never have permitted combat. This was, as Durar explained with great seriousness, a measurement of warriors' reflexes. Two opponents stand at opposite ends of a designated space. A signal is given. Each must reach a marked point in the center, strike a sensor target, and return to their starting position. Whoever completes the sequence fastest is declared the victor of that round. Simple, clean, measurable. Durathi warriors train for this from birth. Dura herself had mentioned, casually, the way one mentions something that should terrify everyone in the room, that the current hegemony record for the sequence was held by her niece, who had completed it in just under 4 seconds. 4 seconds. The designated space was approximately 20 meters end to end. 10 meters to the center. 10 meters back. I pulled Commander Vasek aside before the demonstration was scheduled to begin. We stood in the corridor outside the main chamber, and I spoke to her with the precise calm of someone who was not, internally, experiencing significant distress. "Commander," I said, "I want to be very clear about something. The Durathi competitor tomorrow will be a trained warrior who has been performing this specific sequence since childhood. You are being asked to demonstrate the format. You are not being asked to win. In fact, it would be diplomatically preferable if you performed adequately but not exceptionally, so as not to create any impression of bias toward either party." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Voruk. Can I call you Voruk? You may call me Attaché Shadecaller." "Voruk," she said, "I hear what you're saying. I really do. And I want you to know that I take my role as a neutral observer very seriously." I felt something that I can only describe as cautious relief. Then she said, "But I also want you to know that I ran track and field for 6 years. I did 3 combat readiness certifications last cycle, and I have been sitting in a chair for 11 months watching 2 species argue about rocks." The cautious relief evaporated. "Commander Vasek, I'll be diplomatic about it," she said. "I promise." She gave me the smile again. I had by this point developed a physiological response to that smile. My secondary jaw would tighten. My primary circulatory organ would increase its output. Something ancient and instinctive in my nervous system would begin quietly calculating exit routes. We returned to the chamber. The morning of the demonstration arrived with the specific cruelty that mornings always carry when you have not slept. The main chamber had been reconfigured. The long negotiating table had been moved to the edges. The floor, smooth diplomatic-grade paneling, had been marked with 2 starting points at the far ends and a sensor target at the precise center. A simple light-based trigger. Strike the sensor. It flashes. Time is recorded. Ambassador Dura stood at one side with her delegation. 3 Durathi aides, all approximately the size of small architectural structures, watched with the composed patience of people who were very sure about what was about to happen. Ambassador Solvek and his Solvani advisors floated near the ceiling. One of the advisors had already turned a faint anticipatory shade of gold. I stood at the official recording station. I had my documentation tablet. I had my stylus. I had the calm, professional expression of someone who was absolutely not holding his secondary jaw closed with active muscular effort. Commander Vasek stood at the starting position on the left side of the chamber. She had removed her formal jacket. She was wearing the fitted base layer of her Terran cooperative uniform, the dark gray one with the service markings on the shoulder. She was rolling her shoulders in a slow, rotating motion that I had come to understand was something humans did before physical activity, the way a Valari might extend their sensory filaments or a Durathi might vibrate their chest plates. Dura's senior aide, a warrior named Ket, stood at the starting position on the right side. Ket was approximately 2.3 meters tall, built from the specific type of dense Durathi musculature that made other species instinctively recalibrate their understanding of what a body could be, and was watching Commander Valsek with the expression of someone examining an insect that had stumbled into the wrong garden. The signal would be given by the chamber's automated system. A tone, then the sequence would begin. I cleared my primary throat. This is a demonstration of format only. Both participants are asked to complete the sequence to illustrate the contest structure. The official competition between designated hegemony and collective representatives will follow tomorrow as scheduled. This demonstration carries no diplomatic weight, and no points will be allocated. I said this for the record. I also said it because I needed everyone in the room, including Commander Vosik, to understand that this was not a competition. I looked at her one more time. She was bent very slightly at the knee. Her weight was forward. Her eyes were on the sensor at the center of the chamber with an expression that I had in 11 months never seen on her face before. It was not the smile. It was something quieter than the smile, more focused. The smile was for the room. This expression was for the 10 meters of floor between her and that sensor. I looked at Ket. Ket was standing straight, relaxed. The confidence of a mountain. The automated system gave its tone. What happened next took approximately 3.1 seconds. I know this because the chamber's timing system recorded it. I will tell you what I saw, because what I saw and what the recording confirmed were two different experiences of the same event. What I saw was a sound, a blur of dark gray moving across 20 meters of floor in a way that registered in my nervous system not as motion but as wrongness, the kind of wrongness that your body identifies before your brain does, and then the sensor flashing, and then the dark gray moving back, and then Commander Vasek standing at her starting position again. Ket had made it approximately 4 meters from the starting line. The chamber was silent. Then, from above, one of the Solvani advisors turned the specific shade of purple that means something between "I witnessed that" and "I need a moment." Ket turned and looked at Commander Velasic. Commander Velasic was breathing, normally, like someone who had stood up from a chair. Dura's chest plates did something I had never seen Durathi chest plates do before. They were silent. I looked at my documentation tablet. The timing system had logged 2 numbers. Ket, incomplete, 4.8 meters traveled at session end. Commander Vosek, 3.1 seconds, full sequence completed. I looked at Commander Velasic. She looked at me. Diplomatic about it, she said quietly. I did not say anything. I wrote in my documentation tablet. Demonstration concluded, I said out loud to the room. Both participants have illustrated the format of the sequence. The official competition will proceed tomorrow as scheduled. Nobody moved for approximately 4 seconds. Then Ket, very slowly, turned back to face the center of the chamber and stared at the sensor target like it had personally betrayed him. And Ambassador Dura's chest plates finally vibrated. They vibrated for a long time. I did not have a word in Valari for what she was expressing. But I had a word for what I was feeling, standing in that chamber, tablet in hand, watching 2 species of ancient, proud, territorial beings try to process what they had just seen. The word was, "This is only part 1. How to 1. Tomorrow we were doing this officially. I needed to sleep. I did not sleep. I want you to understand something about diplomatic protocol. It exists for a reason. It exists because, without it, beings with different biologies, different histories, different definitions of the word reasonable, would simply walk into rooms and start expressing their feelings directly. And direct feelings, when expressed between species who have been arguing about mineral rights for 3 centuries, tend to escalate in ways that require significantly more paperwork than I am personally equipped to handle. Protocol is the fence. Diplomacy is the fence builder. And I, Voruk Shadecaller, senior diplomatic attaché, 3rd seat of the peacekeeping tribunal, had spent 11 months maintaining that fence with great personal sacrifice and a growing collection of tension-related physical symptoms that my physician had recently described as impressive in their variety. I want you to understand all of that, so that you understand what it meant when I woke up on the morning of the official duel, stared at the ceiling of my quarters on the station, and said, out loud to nobody, something is going to go wrong today. Not because I am pessimistic. I am professionally calibrated. There is a difference. I said it because the previous evening, after the demonstration, After Ket had stood at the center of the chamber staring at the sensor target for an unsettling amount of time, after the Solvani advisors had spent 40 minutes turning various shades of gold and purple in what I can only describe as an extended group processing session, I had received 3 separate requests. The first was from Ambassador Dora. It said, in the clipped formal vibration-translated language of the hegemony, "We wish to modify the designated competitor for tomorrow's official contest." The second was from Ambassador Solvek. It said, in the precise legal formatting that the collective applied to everything including, I suspected, their grocery lists, the collective formally requests clarification on the biological parameters of the Terran Cooperative's neutral observer, specifically regarding her classification under the Accord Species Capability Index. The third was from Commander Vasek. It said, "Hey, are we still on for tomorrow? Also, do you want some of this food I have? It is really good. It is called halva, and I brought too much." I did not respond to any of them that night. I sat in my quarters. I reviewed the Accord's founding charter for the 14th time in 11 months, and I had the specific thought that visits every diplomat eventually, the thought that sounds like maybe I should have studied something else. The morning assembly in the main chamber had a different atmosphere than the previous day. I noticed it the moment I entered. The air was different, not chemically, atmospherically. The way a room feels when everyone in it knows that something is about to happen and is calculating their position relative to it. The Dorathi delegation had arrived early, all 5 of them. They were arranged along the right wall with the specific stillness of beings who had spent the night preparing. Ket was not among them. In his place stood a warrior I had not seen before. She was introduced to me formally by Ambassador Dora's protocol officer, as Honored Blade Sarek, current holder of the hegemony's regional speed record. I looked at Sarek. Sarek was perhaps 2.4 meters tall, with the dense stone-gray musculature of a Dorathi in peak physical condition, and the expression of someone who had been told, the previous evening, what 3.1 seconds looked like, and had decided to treat that information as a personal problem requiring a personal solution. She was stretching, slowly, with great intention. The Solvani delegation had also arrived in full, 8 of them including Solvek, floating in a loose cluster near the ceiling. 2 of them were already a very faint gold, preemptive anticipation gold. They had not yet seen anything worth turning gold about, which told me they had also spent the night processing the previous day's events, and had arrived prepared to process more. Commander Vasek was at the refreshment station in the corner, drinking something hot from a sealed container. She was wearing the same dark gray base layer. She had her hair pulled back in a way that I had learned. Over 11 months she only did when she was treating something seriously. She saw me enter. She raised the container slightly in greeting. I walked to her. I will not describe my expression. I will say that my secondary jaw was doing the thing it does. "Commander Vanesik," I said, "I need to speak with you before this begins." "I figured," she said. She put the container down. "What's on your mind, Vorak?" "Yesterday's demonstration." I paused, selecting words with the care of someone diffusing something. "The timing, 3.1 seconds. Yep. That is, to my knowledge, faster than any recorded non-Dorathi performance of this sequence in any context I am aware of." "Probably," she said. "My fasto competitor, Honored Blade Sarek is a regional record holder." Vasek looked across the room at Sarek. Sarek, who had apparently peripheral awareness of everything in the chamber, looked back. The look lasted approximately 1 second, and contained in that 1 second a volume of competitive information that I lacked the biology to fully process. Vasek looked back at me. "She's good," she said. It did not sound like a concession. It sounded like something a person says when they are recalibrating their plans upward. "Commander." I stepped slightly closer and lowered my voice. "I want to remind you of what I said yesterday. You are a neutral observer. Your role in this process is to facilitate, not to compete. Yesterday's demonstration was sufficient. Today, Sarek is the hegemony's designated competitor. The collective's designated competitor is a Solvani biokinetic specialist named Reth, who apparently, according to the request I received last night, has been in physical training since dawn." Vasek blinked. "They have a biokinetic specialist?" Solvani biokinetic motion is capable of extremely rapid directional changes when the tissue clusters are operating in optimal synchronized mode. Rith has apparently achieved synchronization rates that are, according to Solvek's documentation, quote, "extraordinary for a non-Deathworld species." Vasek was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Why am I competing again? You are not supposed to be competing. You are a neutral observer. Then why does everyone keep looking at me like I am?" I did not have a clean answer for that. The honest answer was that the previous day, Commander Vasek had done something in 3.1 seconds that had functionally altered the emotional architecture of the negotiation. And now both delegations were orbiting that event like it was a gravitational body, and nothing about today was going to proceed the way the official schedule described. I said, "Please be measured." She gave me the smile. "That's Gamodan Honorable Tour." I went to the recording station. The official format was explained by the Chamber's protocol system, which I had programmed the previous evening with the specific hope that having a machine deliver the rules would reduce the opportunity for interpretation. The hegemony and collective would each designate one competitor. The sequence was identical to the demonstration. Starting position. Tone, 20 meters. Strike the sensor. Return. Fastest time wins the point under negotiation, which was specifically the right of first survey on 2 contested star systems in the outer Gorvan approach. The point was symbolic. Both parties had agreed that the outcome would be binding and that no legal challenge would be filed against the result. I had gotten that in writing. 3 copies, signed by both ambassadors, witnessed by myself, and filed with the Accord's central archive before anyone had a chance to develop opinions about it retroactively. The collective's competitor, Reth, descended from the ceiling cluster with a motion that was, I will admit, visually striking. A Solvanian biokinetic preparation mode is not what most beings expect when they think of a speed competitor. The tissue clusters reorganize, tighten, shift from their usual loose floating configuration into something denser, more directed. Reth, prepared, looked like a compressed light source with intent. Sarek took her starting position on the opposite side. She was not stretching anymore. She was still. The Durathi stillness that is not peace but waiting. I looked at the timing system. I looked at my tablet. I looked at Commander Vasek, who had returned to the corner and was watching with her arms loosely crossed and her weight on one leg. The tone sounded. Sarek moved like geology had opinions. There is no other way I can describe Durathi motion at full exertion to someone who has not witnessed it. Humans move with visible mechanics. You can see the joints, the push, the transfer of force. Durathi warriors at full speed do not appear to have joints. They appear to have a starting point and an end point, and the distance between them is a formality that the universe handles on their behalf. Sarek crossed the 10 meters to the sensor in something that my visual processing registered as instantaneous and my timing system registered as 1.9 seconds. She struck the sensor. It flashed. She returned. 3.7 seconds. Total sequence. The Durathi delegation's side of the room produced a sound that I can only describe as collective geological satisfaction. Rith moved on the tone with a fluidity that Solvani biokinetics are genuinely optimized for. Directional change is where Solvani competitors excel. The going is fast. The striking and returning is faster. Rith's time came in at 4.1 seconds. Still very fast. Faster than anything non-Durathi I had personally witnessed before yesterday. Sarek had won the point. Ambassador Solvek turned a deep measured purple. Ambassador Dura's chest plates hummed at a frequency I recognized, from my Durathi language training, as the equivalent of composed satisfaction. The kind that is one layer above gloating and one layer below grace. I prepared to make the official announcement. And then Honored Blade Sarek did something unexpected. She walked across the chamber. Not to her delegation. Not to the center. She walked to the refreshment station in the corner. Stopped in front of Commander Vasek, and stood there with the specific posture that Durathi warriors adopt when they are issuing a formal statement. The room noticed. The room became the textured silence again. Sarek said, in translated Durathi, "Yesterday. 3.1 seconds. You are not a warrior by our designation." "By what discipline?" Vasek looked up at her. Then she said, "Running, combat training. A lot of time in small spaces where being slow had consequences." Sarek was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your form is not Durathi. Your start is not Durathi. Your return is faster than your advance. That is not a trained sequence. That is instinct." The Sec looked at her for another moment. Then she said, "Yes." Something moved across Sarek's expression. Something I had spent 11 months learning to read in Durathi faces. It was not what I expected. It was not dismissal. It was not competitive calculation. It was recognition. It was recognition. I remend your rating. You acknowledged the blunt of boat. My weekends have Juntrivmanare Johnstown Portnus Conscion White. Sarek said, "Would you run it again, against me? Not for the record. Not for the negotiation. For the knowing." The chamber absorbed this. I put down my stylus. Ambassador Dura had turned from the recording station and was watching. Ambassador Solvek had descended approximately half a meter from the ceiling, which, for a Solvani, is the floating equivalent of leaning forward. I looked at Commander Vasek. She was looking at Sarek with an expression I had never seen before. Not the smile, not the focused look from yesterday. Something that was both of those things and also something older. The look of someone who has been handed an invitation that arrives in a language they did not expect to be spoken here. She looked at me. I looked back. I said nothing. I did not say anything because I had been a diplomat for 22 years and I understood, with great professional clarity, that there are moments in a negotiation when the correct move is to be very still and very quiet, and let what is happening happen. Vasek set her container down on the refreshment station. She said, "Okay." They took their positions at opposite ends of the chamber. No tone this time. The automated system was not involved. They looked at each other across 20 meters of floor, two beings from two entirely different histories, two entirely different bodies, two entirely different understandings of what speed meant and what it cost. And Sarek nodded once. That was the signal. I have, in the years since that morning, been asked to describe what happened next by 17 different colleagues, 4 journalists, 2 xenobiological researchers, and 1 Durathi cultural historian who was writing a paper on the concept of martial recognition across species boundaries. What I tell all of them is this. I watched it happen and I still do not fully have the words. Sarek was extraordinary. She was the regional record holder. She moved with the absolute confidence of someone who had performed this sequence 10,000 times and had made every inefficiency bleed out of it over years of training. She was power expressed as direction, force expressed as precision. Vasek moved differently. If Sarek was a stone released from height, Vasek was something that had never stopped moving and was simply choosing, right now, to move here. Her start was lower, faster at initiation, the kind of explosive first step that Durathi physiology does not produce because Durathi physiology does not need to, because Durathi physiology has mass, and mass does not need a trick start. Vasek had a trick start. She had several tricks, actually, embedded in the mechanics of how a human body generates speed from a standing position, and they were all firing simultaneously. She reached the sensor a fraction ahead. She struck it. She turned. Sarek turned. The return was where it happened. Vasek's return was, as Sarek had identified, faster than her advance. The physics of human deceleration and reversal are different from Durathi physics. Humans slow, plant, and redirect with a mechanical efficiency that trades mass for spring. Vasek's return was the spring. They crossed the finish line almost simultaneously. The timing system registered, Sarek, 3.4 seconds, Vasek, 3.0 seconds, 0.4 of a second. In the official contest, Sarek had run 3.7. This unofficial run had shaved 0.3 off her time. She had adjusted between the contest and this run. She had watched Vasek's mechanics in the demonstration, absorbed them and adapted. And Vasek had run 3.0. The Solvani near the ceiling were colors that I did not have reference points for. One of the advisors had turned a shade that my visual processing could only categorize as a color I have not seen before today. The Durathi delegation was making the low vibration sound. All 5 of them. Ambassador Dura walked from her position at the wall to the center of the chamber. She stood in front of Commander Vasek. She was 2.3 meters tall. Vasek was 1.7. The size difference was the kind that usually produces a specific social dynamic. It did not produce that dynamic today. Tura said.
What world made you?
Vasek said. Earth. Humans call it Earth. Durath was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, in the formal vibration translated register that Durathi use for official statements, a death world. Some people call it that. Vasek said. The classifications exist for a reason, Dura said. We knew humans were Deathworld stock. We have read the reports. She paused. Reading is different from seeing. Vasek said. Yeah, it usually is. Dura turned to look at Ambassador Solvek. Solvek had descended to floor level. For a Solvani, floor level is an act of significant deliberate intentionality. It is not where they rest. It is where they go when they want to make a point with their body, Dura said. To Solvek. The Terran Cooperative's observer ran faster than my honored blade. Solvek pulsed a slow, measured silver. Silver, in Solvani expression, is acknowledgement without challenge. He said, we observed, Dura said, and your competitor ran 4.1, also observed. Dura's chest plates vibrated in a long, rolling sequence. The contest was a good idea, she said. I did not think it was when the humans suggested it, Solvek said. Nor did I. They looked at each other. Two species who had been arguing about rocks for 3 centuries, standing on opposite sides of a chamber that was supposed to be a negotiating room and had, over the course of one morning, become something else entirely. Dura said. 1 point, hegemony's favor. As agreed. Solvek said. As agreed. Then Dora said something that I was not prepared for, despite 22 years of preparation for the unexpected. She said we will concede the secondary survey access on the outer Gorvan approach in exchange for the hegemony's preferred routing of the trade corridor. Both parties receive primary interests. Neither party receives everything. I looked up from my tablet. Solvek turned gold. Not the faint anticipatory gold. The deep settled gold of a Salvani, who has received something genuine. I said, Ambassador Dura, are you proposing a mutual concession framework outside the formal session? I am proposing a resolution. She said, the formal session can document it. That is what formal sessions are for. I looked at my tablet. I looked at the timing system. I looked at the 2 ambassadors, standing at floor level on the same side of nothing in particular, for the first time in 11 months. Then I looked at Commander Vasek. She was standing near the refreshment station again. She had retrieved her container. She was drinking from it. She met my eyes over the rim. I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, I will prepare the documentation. She raised the container slightly, not a toast, just an acknowledgement. The gesture of someone who had suggested something that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time and had turned out, against all professional expectations, to actually be reasonable. The resolution framework was signed 14 days later. The Durathi hegemony and the Salvani collective reached a binding agreement on territorial boundaries, mineral extraction rights and trade route access that addressed the primary concerns of both parties and created a joint oversight structure for disputed zones that had not existed before. 11 months of sessions had not produced it. 2 runs across a 20-meter floor had not produced it, technically, but something about those 2 runs had shifted the air in the room in a way that all the careful language and all the proper protocol had not managed to shift in all that time. I wrote about it in my formal report to the Accord. I used measured language, professional language. I described the events accurately and attributed the breakthrough to a combination of symbolic contest mechanics, adjusted competitive framing, and the introduction of a mutual reference point that allowed both parties to recalibrate their assessment of the negotiation stakes. What I did not write in the formal report, because formal reports are not the place for it, was what Sarek said to Commander Vasek on the last day, when the signing was done and the delegations were preparing to depart. She said, 3.0. Vasek said, you would have gotten there. You took 0.3 off between the contest and the run. Give it another week and you would have had me. Sarek looked at her. Perhaps, she said. But you would not have been standing still. Vasek smiled, not the smile she uses for rooms. The other one. The one she had worn while looking at the sensor. No, she said. Probably not. Sarek made the low vibration sound. I had learned by that point what the specific frequency meant. It meant respect. I have been asked, since that mission, whether I believe the duel is a valid diplomatic tool. My official answer is that the Accord's charter provides sufficient framework for evaluating novel procedural innovations on a case-by-case basis, and that the outcomes of the Gorvan Belt negotiation represent a data point worth studying. My personal answer is that I watched a human run 20 meters and back in 3 seconds, and somehow, inexplicably, 2 species who had been arguing since before my grandparents were born, looked at each other and decided that maybe they did not need to keep arguing. I do not fully understand it. I have thought about it for a long time. My best theory is that there is something about witnessing something genuinely surprising, something that does not fit the shape of what you expected the world to contain, that loosens the grip of what you thought you already knew. Duraji expected a small human in a diplomatic uniform. She got 3.0 seconds. Solvek expected a formality. He got a new color he had never turned before. And both of them, for just a moment, stopped being ancient rivals with 3 centuries of grievance and became something simpler. Beings who had just seen something worth seeing. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it was always going to be enough, if someone could find the right thing to show them. I am not saying this is a replicable methodology. I am not recommending that the Accord begin resolving disputes through athletic demonstration. I am, professionally, saying no such thing. But I did keep the timing record. Both of them. The demonstration and the unofficial run. 3.1 seconds. Then 3.0. I filed them in the official documentation under the category of notable events during proceedings. The category did not previously exist. I created it specifically for this mission. I suspect I will need it again.
And that is how one human, one food container and the 3.0 seconds did what 11 months of diplomacy couldn't. Urek kept the timing record. Sarik carried a new question home. Solveig invented a color that has no name yet. And Vezek picked up her container and went back to the corner. No speech, no celebration, just 3 seconds that changed everything. Because that is what humans do. They don't announce themselves. They don't explain themselves. They simply move and the universe adjusts. If that give you chills, subscribe. More stories are coming. You are watching Sci-Fi HFY channel.